The wedding hall sparkled with light. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting reflections across the polished marble floors. The air was filled with laughter, conversation, and the faint fragrance of roses and fresh flowers. Waiters moved gracefully among the guests, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Music played softly in the background, a carefully chosen classical ensemble to accompany the elegance of the evening. At the center of it all stood Angela, the bride, a vision in her ivory gown. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate, and her expression won a complete self-assurance. She held her champagne flute delicately, scanning the crowd with a smile that was confident, almost arrogant. Mrs. Ebel, the groom's mother, had been nothing but kind and accommodating throughout the wedding preparations. She had ensured every detail, from the seating arrangement to the flower arrangements, was perfect. She had welcomed Angela into the family with patience and warmth, hoping that over time, the bride would grow to respect her. But Angela had never felt comfortable in her presence. She felt scrutinized, judged, and overshadowed at every turn. Tonight, she decided to make her feelings known. As Mrs. Ebel approached to offer a polite greeting, Angela tilted her head and spoke loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Oh, I see you've worn that old dress again. I guess some people never change." The reaction in the hall was immediate. A hush fell over the room. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses clinked against plates, then silence. The orchestra, mid-note, faltered. All eyes turned toward the pair at the center of the hall. Mrs. Ebel froze, her hands slightly trembling. She pressed her lips into a thin line, choosing not to respond immediately. Her eyes, however, revealed the depth of her shock and hurt. Guests whispered to each other in disbelief. Some tried to hide their reactions, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few turned away, pretending to be interested in other things. Angela, however, stood tall, clearly enjoying the attention and the discomfort she had caused. She let out a small, sharp laugh, raising her chin slightly as though daring anyone to challenge her audacity. In that moment, Michael, the groom, returned from a brief conversation at the front of the hall. He was unaware of the confrontation at first, but as his eyes fell on his mother, the words Angela had spoken struck him like a physical blow. His jaw tightened, and he took a slow, deliberate step forward. His posture was calm, yet there was an unmistakable tension radiating from him. His hands clenched at his sides, and a vein on his temple throbbed slightly. The guests noticed a sudden change in atmosphere. What seemed like a minor spat between the bride and her mother-in-law had escalated into something far more serious. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the groom to react. Michael's eyes met his mother's, and she gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The kind of nod that spoke volumes in silence, a signal only he could understand. His gaze returned to Angela. He did not shout. He did not storm toward her. Instead, he took a measured step in her direction, his calm demeanor more intimidating than any outburst could have been. "Angela," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying authority without shouting, "I think it's time we step outside." Angela froze. She had expected him to defend her in some small way, or perhaps ignore the comment entirely. She did not anticipate this calm, controlled authority. The guests leaned in, curious, some holding their breath. Angela opened her mouth to speak, to dismiss the seriousness of her words, but the words caught in her throat. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint music still playing in the background. Her confidence faltered, though she tried to hide it behind a small, forced smile. Michael continued walking toward her, each step deliberate. The air was thick with tension. The whispers among the guests grew louder, though no one dared intervene. Some exchanged shocked glances, silently questioning Angela's audacity. Others tried to rationalize the incident in hushed tones, but the truth was clear. This was not just an insult. It was a public humiliation directed at someone everyone respected. He reached her, stopped, and looked directly into her eyes. "Let's go," he repeated, firm yet calm. Angela, sensing the seriousness in his tone, followed him silently. They moved toward the back doors that led to the private garden. Outside, the moonlight illuminated the dew-soaked grass. The garden, usually a serene and romantic setting, now seemed charged with the electricity of confrontation. Angela tried to regain her composure, her lips curling into what she hoped was a confident smirk. "It's just a harmless comment," she said, her voice wavering slightly. Michael's expression darkened. "A harmless comment? You insulted my mother in front of everyone, my family, our guests, and you thought it would go unnoticed?" Angela opened her mouth to defend herself, but Michael raised a finger to stop her. "Let me finish." He took a slow step closer, ensuring his voice carried weight. "Respect is not optional. My mother gave me everything. Every sacrifice, every lesson, every ounce of love you could never understand. And you humiliated her." Angela felt a chill run down her spine. She had expected anger, perhaps yelling, but this controlled disappointment was far more intimidating. Michael's calm authority left no room for argument, no room for excuses. "You have two choices," he said quietly, his gaze unwavering. "Apologize sincerely, or leave this wedding and do not return until you understand what it means to respect family." Angela's face paled. Her arrogance faltered, her confidence slipping as she realized she had misjudged her husband. He valued integrity, respect, and family above all else, and she had crossed a line she hadn't anticipated. She whispered, almost inaudibly, I'm sorry." Michael nodded slowly. "Good. That's a start." They walked back into the hall together. The shift was immediate. Angela's posture had changed. Her head was slightly lowered, her face flushed with embarrassment. Michael's hand rested lightly on his mother's arm, a quiet gesture of reassurance. Mrs. Ebel smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. The guests murmured among themselves, some in awe, others in quiet judgment. Angela's arrogance had been publicly corrected, not with humiliation or shouting, but with calm, undeniable authority. The message was clear. True power comes not from insults, but from respect, integrity, and character. The atmosphere in the hall gradually returned to normal, but the tension lingered. Everyone had witnessed a lesson in humility and respect that no one would forget for a long time. And for Angela, the realization had just begun. She had underestimated the depth of character in the man she had married, and the value of the woman she had insulted. The garden outside the wedding hall was bathed in soft moonlight, the grass glistening from an earlier drizzle. A cool breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the hall. Normally, this secluded area was a place for quiet conversation or romantic moments, but tonight it felt charged, tense, and heavy with anticipation. Angela followed Michael silently, her confident stride faltering slightly with every step. She tried to convince herself she had done nothing wrong. It was a harmless comment, she reasoned, a joke disguised as criticism. But Michael's silence, his calm authority, made her question herself. She felt exposed under his unwavering gaze. Michael stopped in the center of the garden and turned to face her. His expression was calm, but the intensity in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. This was not anger. It was controlled disappointment, an emotion far more dangerous because it demanded self-reflection. "Angela," he began, his voice steady and deliberate, "do you understand the weight of what you just said?" Angela hesitated. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure what to say. It was just a joke," she finally muttered, her voice shaky. Michael shook his head slowly. "A joke." His tone remained calm, but each word carried the weight of authority. "You insulted my mother in front of our guests. That is not a joke. That is a betrayal of trust, respect, and family values. Do you understand that?" Angela's smile vanished. She swallowed hard. The cool night air suddenly felt suffocating. I didn't mean to." "You did," Michael interrupted softly, cutting her off. "Whether you intended it or not, your words cause pain. Public humiliation is never acceptable, especially toward a person who raised me, nurtured me, and sacrificed everything so I could be the man I am today." Angela's face turned pale. She had never thought about her mother-in-law's sacrifices in detail. In her mind, Mrs. Ebel was simply an obstacle, a critical figure in her new life. She had never considered the years of dedication, love, and support that woman had given. Michael took a slow step closer, his gaze unwavering. "You may have thought you were asserting yourself, showing confidence, or even cleverness. But true strength does not come from tearing others down. True strength comes from respect, integrity, and compassion. Angela's lips parted, but no words came out. She had no defense, no clever comeback. For the first time that evening, she realized she had underestimated Michael, not just as her husband, but as someone with values, someone who protected his family with quiet authority. Michael continued, his voice steady but firm. You have a choice now. You can continue down the path of arrogance, humiliation, and selfishness, or you can recognize your mistake, apologize sincerely, and learn what it means to be part of this family. Angela's eyes welled with tears. The cold night air seemed oppressing around her, heavy with the weight of realization. This was no longer a game. Her actions had consequences, and Michael had reminded her of them with a calm that cut deeper than any angry outburst ever could. I'm sorry, she whispered, almost inaudibly. Her voice trembled as the words left her lips, genuine and raw for the first time that night. Michael nodded slowly. Good. That's a start. A sincere apology is more than words. It is a recognition of the truth and a commitment to change. Angela's chest tightened. She had never been confronted in such a way before. This was not about social appearances or etiquette. It was about respect, love, and family loyalty, the things she had ignored in her arrogance. For a moment, neither spoke. The night was silent except for the distant murmurs from the wedding hall and the faint rustling of leaves. Angela looked up at the moonlight, and for the first time, she truly reflected on her behavior. She thought about all the small gestures of Mrs. Ebel over the past weeks, guiding her through the wedding preparations, ensuring her comfort, offering advice with patience and care. She realized that every criticism she had offered, every moment of disdain, had been a reflection of her own insecurity and impatience. Michael broke the silence. Your words tonight have consequences, Angela, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. You may think this is trivial, but humiliation leaves scars. Respect and kindness leave a legacy. Which legacy do you want to carry forward? Angela swallowed, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had never felt such clarity, such a sense of her own mistakes. I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I will do better. I will respect your mother. I will respect you. I promise. Michael's stern expression softened slightly. Your apology is only meaningful if it is followed by action. Words without change are meaningless. Show respect. Demonstrate compassion. Learn humility. Only then will you earn the trust of this family. Angela nodded, her tears reflecting the moonlight. She had never felt so small, and yet so aware of her own flaws. The arrogance and pride that had driven her actions earlier were gone, replaced by a raw and humbling awareness of her behavior. The distant sound of laughter from the wedding hall reminded her that life would continue, that guests were still celebrating, oblivious of the private lesson unfolding outside. But this lesson, the confrontation, the realization, the apology, would stay with her forever. Michael placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of guidance rather than punishment. Come back inside. It is time to return to your place in this family, not as someone who insults, but as someone who respects, learns, and grows. Angela nodded and allowed him to lead her back into the hall. Each step she took felt heavier, but also cleansing, as though each footfall was a step toward maturity and understanding. As they re-entered the hall, Mrs. Ebel looked at Angela. Her eyes, once filled with hurt, now reflected cautious hope. Angela lowered her head slightly and offered a small, sincere smile. It was an acknowledgment of her mistake, a quiet promise to change. The guests noticed immediately. Whispers passed through the crowd, some in surprise, others in admiration. Angela's public display of arrogance had been corrected not through shouting or confrontation, but through calm authority, quiet power, and moral integrity. For Angela, the lesson was clear. True power is not measured by arrogance, insults, or manipulation. It is measured by respect, empathy, and understanding. She had learned this lesson tonight, under the watchful eyes of her husband and the woman she had wronged. The atmosphere in the hall softened. Music resumed. Conversations began again, though the energy was subtly changed. Everyone had witnessed a moment of humility, a lesson in respect, and a quiet power of character over arrogance. Angela remained silent, reflecting on her actions and the impact they had caused. She realized that the path forward would require effort, patience, and genuine respect. But for the first time, she was ready to take that path. And for Michael, the night had reinforced a simple truth. Authority combined with empathy is more powerful than anger, and true respect within a family is non-negotiable. The wedding hall was quieter now, but not empty. Conversations continued in hushed tones, and guests glanced toward Angela as she re-entered with Michael. The subtle shift in her posture and expression did not go unnoticed. Where she had once walked with arrogance, she now moved cautiously, her steps lighter, almost hesitant. Guests whispered among themselves, unsure how to react. Some smiled knowingly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The bride who had insulted the groom's mother in front of everyone was now returning, humbled, accompanied by a husband whose quiet authority had left a lasting impression on everyone present. Angela's eyes met Mrs. Ebble's. The older woman's gaze was soft, yet penetrating, filled with a mixture of relief and quiet judgment. Angela lowered her head slightly, acknowledging her mistake without words. It was a gesture of submission and understanding, something that words alone could not convey. Michael led her back to the seating area reserved for the couple. Guests watched in silence as she took her place beside him. The orchestra, sensing the tension, resumed the music, but this time the notes seemed to carry an air of reflection rather than celebration. The hall felt different, charged with a mixture of relief, awe, and quiet respect. As the evening progressed, Angela struggled to regain her composure. She smiled politely at guests, nodded at well-wishers, and accepted congratulations with a subtle sense of humility that had been absent earlier. Each gesture reminded her of the lesson she had received in the garden. Her mind replayed Michael's words, the firmness in his voice, the controlled disappointment that had cut deeper than any public embarrassment ever could. Mrs. Ebble observed quietly from a distance, her expression unreadable. She had expected arrogance and defiance from Angela, and while some remained, there was a noticeable shift. Angela's demeanor was calmer, her pride tempered by the realization that respect could not be commanded. It had to be earned. A few hours into the reception, a situation arose that tested Angela's newfound humility. One of the younger cousins, unaware of the earlier incident, approached her with a teasing comment about the mother-in-law's dress. Angela felt a surge of the old arrogance rising within her, but quickly checked herself. She remembered Michael's words and the weight of the lesson he had delivered. Instead of responding with sarcasm or ridicule, she smiled gently and changed the topic, redirecting the conversation in a polite manner. The small moment of self-restraint felt monumental. Angela realized that humility was not a one-time act of apology. It was a continuous effort to control impulses and choose respect over ego. Each small interaction became a reminder that her actions could have lasting consequences, and that every word carried weight. Later in the evening, during the dinner speeches, the tension in the room reached another peak. Guests were called to offer their blessings and congratulations. Angela listened as relatives praised Michael for his composure and integrity, highlighting the respect he showed his family and the dignity he maintained in every interaction. Angela's heart sank slightly with each compliment. She understood that the spotlight was no longer on her arrogance, but on the values she had ignored. The contrast between her behavior and Michael's character could not have been more apparent. It was a humbling realization. Mrs. Ebble approached the couple during a quiet moment, her steps deliberate and measured. Angela's chest tightened. She expected a harsh reprimand, perhaps a public scolding to remind her of her earlier insult. But instead, Mrs. Ebble spoke softly. "Angela," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I know you have much to learn. Respect is not given because it is expected. It is given because it is deserved. You're taking the first step tonight by acknowledging your mistake. Continue on this path, and you will earn your place in this family." Angela nodded, swallowing hard. The words were not just a rebuke. They were guidance. She realized that true respect required more than apologies. It required consistent behavior, genuine humility, and a willingness to change. Michael, standing beside his mother, placed a reassuring hand on Angela's shoulder. "This is a new beginning," he said softly. "You will make mistakes, but the measure of character is how you respond to them. Tonight, you have begun to understand that." The night continued, but Angela remained introspective. Every glance she received from the guests felt like a mirror reflecting her actions. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with judgment, but all eyes reminded her that arrogance left a mark, while humility could restore dignity. Later, as the music slowed and guests began to dance, Angela observed Michael dancing with his mother, laughing gently, sharing a moment of genuine joy. She felt a pang of guilt, but also admiration. She understood that the bond between mother and son was unbreakable, built on years of love, sacrifice, and mutual respect, something she had almost destroyed with a careless insult. In that moment, Angela resolved to change, not for appearances, not to avoid further embarrassment, but because she recognized the importance of character, integrity, and respect. She realized that every action she took from this point forward would either strengthen her place in the family or further erode the trust she had been given. The night drew on, and the wedding celebration continued, but the lessons of the evening lingered. Angela's reflection on her behavior became a quiet, personal journey. She began to understand that her arrogance had not only humiliated Mrs. Ebel, but also tested the patience and composure of her husband. The incident in the garden was not merely a confrontation. It was a turning point, a pivotal moment that would shape her. The night had deepened, and the wedding hall was softly illuminated by chandeliers casting warm reflections on the polished floors. Guests had returned to their celebrations, but quiet tension remained, centered around Angela and the events earlier in the evening. She sat beside Michael, her hands folded in her lap, reflecting on the lessons of the night. Every word he had spoken in the garden, every gaze he had given her, echoed in her mind. Angela's earlier arrogance had been replaced by a sense of humility she had never experienced before. She realized that respect and love were not things to demand. They were things to earn. Every careless word, every hasty action, had the power to leave scars on others. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her, a realization that would not leave her easily. Mrs. Ebel approached again, this time with a softer expression, her eyes filled with a quiet, knowing compassion. She extended her hand toward Angela, not as a gesture of dominance, but as an invitation to reconciliation. "Angela," she said gently, "true humility is not spoken. It is shown through action. Tonight, you have taken the first step. Continue to show respect, and the family will accept you fully." Angela took a deep breath and nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I understand now, and I promise to do better. I am sorry for the way I treated you." Michael placed a reassuring hand on Angela's shoulder. "Your apology is meaningful, but remember, it is the actions that follow that define character," he said softly. "The way you behave from this moment forward will determine the trust and respect you earn." The music in the hall shifted to a softer, more reflective melody. Guests watched as Angela, for the first time that evening, approached Mrs. Ebel with genuine humility. She knelt slightly, bowing her head, and extended her hands in a gesture of sincere apology. The mother-in-law studied her carefully, then reached out and gently held Angela's hands. The hall seemed to breathe collectively. The tension that had gripped the room all evening began to dissipate. Whispers of approval, surprise, and admiration traveled through the guests. Angela's sincere acknowledgement of her wrongdoing had transformed the mood. She had moved from arrogance to humility, from ignorance to understanding, and the impact was palpable. Michael stood beside them, watching with pride. His mother's composure, combined with Angela's willingness to reflect and change, had created a moment of genuine reconciliation. The lesson was clear to everyone present. Integrity, respect, and empathy were far more powerful than arrogance or insults. Angela took a moment to reflect privately. She thought about the countless moments she had overlooked. Every time she dismissed her mother-in-law's advice, every sarcastic remark, every subtle act of disdain. Each memory now carried weight, reminding her that respect is not optional but foundational to relationships. The night celebrations continued, but Angela's perspective had shifted dramatically. She engaged with the guests with warmth and sincerity, offering smiles and polite conversation rather than condescension. She noticed the small gestures of kindness from family members she had previously ignored, and each one reminded her of the importance of humility and respect. Later, during the final toast, Michael raised his glass. "Tonight," he said, addressing the room, "we have witnessed the strength of character, the importance of respect, and the power of humility. Let this wedding not only celebrate love, but also the values that bind a family together." Angela, standing beside him, felt a swell of emotion. She realized that her journey that evening had transformed her in ways she could never have anticipated. What had begun as a moment of public humiliation had become a lesson in integrity, compassion, and self-awareness. She looked at Mrs. Ebel and saw not just a woman she had insulted, but a pillar of strength, patience, and love. As the night drew to a close, Angela and Michael stepped outside for a quiet moment alone in the garden. The moonlight reflected off the dew-soaked grass, casting a serene glow over the scene. Angela turned to Michael, her voice filled with sincerity and emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me the right way, for not letting me destroy what matters." Michael smiled, a mixture of relief and pride on his face. "It was not just about tonight," he said softly. "It is about the choices you make every day. True respect and love are proven through consistency, through patience, and through understanding." Angela nodded, feeling the weight and significance of his words. She realized that the events of the night will remain with her forever, shaping not only her relationship with Michael and his family, but also the person she was becoming. The wedding ended with smiles, laughter, and tears of joy. Angela had faced the consequences of her arrogance, learned the importance of humility, and taken steps toward earning trust and respect. Mrs. Ebel embraced her, a gesture that symbolized forgiveness, acceptance, and the restoration of family bonds. For the guests, the night was a spectacle of drama, emotion, and resolution. They had witnessed a transformation, a lesson in character, and the undeniable truth that respect and integrity always triumph over arrogance and pride. Angela looked around at the celebration, her heart full of gratitude and understanding. The bride who had insulted her mother-in-law earlier was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned humility, accepted responsibility, and recognized the power of respect. And as the music faded and the guests began to leave, the memory of the night lingered, not just as a wedding celebration, but as a story of transformation, moral strength, and the enduring bonds of family. The night had been a turning point, a lesson in humility, and a reminder to everyone present that true power lies not in words of arrogance, but in acts of respect, compassion, and integrity. Angela had learned this lesson well, and the impact of her transformation would echo in her life and family for years to come.